Out of all the popular anime directors who are currently working in the industry, I don't think anybody can deny that one of the most renowned and successful ones as of late is Makoto Shinkai. Born in 1973, Shinkai was originally a video game animator who eventually broke away from that to direct Your Name, which was a worldwide sensation and made $1 million, and he solidified himself as the most successful film director of all time. Except that's not exactly what happened. You probably know this, but most artists don't build up such a massive following oh so quickly. More often than not, somebody who has just entered the foray of filmmaking doesn't hit the gold mine on their first try. It takes a lot of time to both improve their skills and grow their audience until they really start to go places. And then with some directors, the opportunity hits them like a sudden burst when they put out their first gigantic hit. Such is the case with Shinkai, whose massive critical and commercial success with Your Name instantly made the public aware of his work and gave him a massive wave of followers. And since then, that following has only been growing and growing with the other movies he's put out. Weathering With You, and more recently, Suzume, are both critically acclaimed movies that have dominated the box office and have secured quite a massive amount of fans. With success like this and movies like these, it's no wonder why Shinkai has reached such a high pedestal of success that can only be surpassed by Miyazaki himself. Oh yeah, and there were also some movies he made before Your Name, and to be honest, this guy is possibly one of the most interesting cases of a popular director that I've ever seen. While nobody can ignore the success of these recent movies, it took him quite a while to get there. And I mean a long time. His first big hit came out in 2016, yet he has been making movies since the early 2000s. His films between then, while not failures, certainly weren't the monster hits that his latest films were. And nor are they nearly as good. But in a way, watching through this guy's filmography in chronological release order was oddly inspiring. It was a neat experience to see somebody who stumbled a bit in their career early on eventually grow their style and blossom into the distinguished director that they're known as today. So despite me not feeling quite as strongly towards this guy's filmography as I do with Miyazaki and Hosoda, I gotta respect him regardless. And with his most recent film releasing in the US, now seems like a good time to go through Shinkai's history of feature films and arrange them based on which ones are amazing and the ones that aren't. No! Anyways, here's the filmography of Makoto Shinkai, ranked from worst to best. Let's get this started.
Disappointment in the game of...
The Place Promised in Our Early Days is absolutely awful. This is possibly the easiest choice for the bottom spot in any ranking video I have ever made because wow. Actually, not wow, because that term implies this movie has some sort of surprise or at least an element of intrigue in store, even if it's bad. But it doesn't. Let me tell ya, it doesn't. I had never heard of this movie prior to marathoning this filmography, nor had I ever seen a single person bring it up. After having watched it, that all makes perfect sense. It is one of the most flat and boring things that I have ever witnessed. I guess it shouldn't be all that surprising given that this was Shinkai's first ever feature film and he didn't have the experience of directing that he would later gain. Admittedly, I do feel a bit mean for trashing this movie when taking that into consideration, but at the same time, this movie is so uninteresting to the point where it's really hard to speak positively about it, even as a first attempt. There's a couple things to appreciate, like the nice music, the background animation and landscapes are really pretty, and there are a few nice wholesome moments, mainly in the first act where we see these kids hang around during their teen years. It's nothing amazing, but it's charming enough. That portion is like 10 minutes of the movie though, the rest is trash. Alright, it's time to talk about the plot of this movie, if it can even be classified as such. The Place Promised in Our Early Days is a movie about this alternate version of Japan where the country was split into North and South territories after World War II. The only reason that I am aware of this is because of the Letterboxd synopsis. I would have no idea based on watching this movie alone. It does practically nothing to introduce the audience to this alternate timeline of our world, and any storytelling potential it may have had is just disposed of. You know, I give movies a lot of flack for exposition dumping, but that actually feels refreshing compared to a movie that doesn't make any sort of attempt to reel the viewer into the world, rather through visuals or dialogue. I especially can't get invested when it's an alternate version of history that ends up feeling like like an afterthought of a backdrop by the end of the film. The actual story is about these two boring kids with no personality who are building a plane or something, and then they meet this girl who also has no personality. Whoop-de-doo. The girl then magically disappears, and there's a time skip where we see the guys all grown up, and this is the point where the movie completely lost me. If I don't care in the slightest about these characters prior to the time skip, what makes you think I'll care about them now? I haven't learned anything about either of them, and so the main characters also have become an afterthought. It feels like every scene with these guys has this super weird saccharine tone, like there's clearly supposed to be some sort of emotional core here, but there's absolutely nothing to support it. It simply does not work. And even if it did work, it would still get drowned out by the 10,000 other useless things they threw into this movie. After the time skip, this movie becomes the most confused and convoluted thing ever written. Suddenly, it's this movie about parallel universes, and the girl from earlier is stuck in this dream, and there's this big tower, and also there's a threat of World War III, what is going on? With the earlier works of Miyazaki and Hosoda, you can kinda tell they were a bit new to this whole directing gig. Not all of the ideas in those movies were quite as well thought out as they eventually would become in the later works of those directors, but at least they tried to limit themselves in how much they tried to pull off at once, and didn't lose grasp on the main story. I have no idea what happened here because it feels like Shinkai tried to insert every idea imaginable into one single film. It just screams first-time director for its entire runtime, and unsurprisingly, it crumbles down into an incoherent mess. This nonsensical chaos all culminates in a climax where the girl is sleeping, and the two guys somehow come to the conclusion that they can wake her up if they fly their plane into this giant tower. And no, I'm not going to make the obvious joke. So there's some flying, and she wakes up, and yup, that's about it. I cannot recall any character arcs or lessons or takeaways or even any moments of interest in this entire 91-minute movie. The place promised in our early days is basically nothing. Honestly, the worst directorial debut I have ever seen in my life. Like, even as a newcomer, how do you mess up everything this badly? It's no wonder why this movie has a non-existent following and is universally ignored, even by the people who like Shinkai's work. There really isn't anything in this movie to latch onto, and nothing that is worth remembering. I will forget everything about this piece of garbage as soon as I finish the video, and I don't even care. It is a film devoid of any sort of narrative substance, and there is absolutely no reason for me to ever revisit it. Bafflingly terrible movie, and Shinkai's worst by a landslide. At least this means that his only option at this point was to improve. And he did. Gradually.
What I want from you is your voice.
Whenever somebody thinks about anime, or at least anime in film, the first thing that comes to their mind would probably be Studio Ghibli. I mean, they are the most popular Japanese animation studio, and for good reason. But surprisingly enough, it doesn't seem like Shinkai has ever crossed paths with them at any point in his career. The reason I bring this up is because Children Who Chased Lost Voices oddly feels very close to something from Ghibli. That's not really something I would say about any of the other films on this list, and it almost feels a little out of place when compared to them. It has a different art style and character designs that straight up scream Ghibli. The movie puts a much heavier focus on fantasy rather than science fiction or natural disasters. Even the tone is trying to be a bit more mystical than the other movies. It's nice to see a Shinkai film take on a different direction for a change, especially since it gets a lot of flack for making movies that all feel samey. But honestly, I'm not really sure if making Ghibli-esque films really suits him. Now, I must say, I wouldn't necessarily call this an outright bad movie. The gap in quality between this and The Place Promised in Our Early Days is really wide. At least with this, I can definitely make sense of the direction that Shinkai was attempting to go in, and it's not a bad attempt. This was still before Shinkai was at the point in his career where he had solidified the style of writing that he's known for, so it is pretty interesting to see him take on a different approach that's closer to that of the high fantasy Ghibli films. All the pieces are here for something that seems like it would be great, but it all kind of falters in the execution and ends up feeling kinda dull, to be honest. It's definitely closer to Goro Miyazaki than it is to Hayao, and for once I'm not actually saying that as a complete insult. There's still a lot to like about this movie, mainly the visuals. Gone is the stiff cheapness of Shinkai's first two films, and in comes a movie with an actual budget. The color palette in this one is really beautiful, and the backgrounds of the mystical world are especially well done. We get to see a lot of the underground, spiritual world of Agartha, and it makes for a really neat setting that helps keep the movie interesting. The world building itself is also pretty intriguing, and it definitely gives off the vibe of something like Princess Mononoke, but in a good way. All the otherworldly creatures that inhabit this place really make it feel fantastical, and sometimes add to the tension, like with these demons that can only travel within the shadows. Plus, beyond that, the culture of the human characters that live there is pretty neat as well. The concept of a world that exists beneath the surface that banish those from up top for exploiting resources and causing violence makes way for a lot of interesting ideas and potential conflicts for the main characters to face. But unfortunately, that's really the furthest that this movie goes. There are great ideas in here, but the film really struggles to fit them into the narrative in the way where they reach their full potential. It makes for a neat backdrop, sure, and definitely more fleshed out than the one in that disaster, but it left me wanting a lot more than what I got. This wouldn't be as bad of a problem if the main characters and their journey were well written and compelling, but like, the movie focuses on a girl named Asuna who is honestly quite boring. Not unlikable or anything, she's fine, but I feel like she has no conflict for the viewer to get into. She's just sort of the main character who goes on a journey to a magical world and then goes home, and that's it. There are pieces of some kind of a character arc for her here and there, but I feel like the movie didn't commit to them, and she's basically in the same position she was at the start of the film at the end of it. More on that in a bit. Her dynamics with everyone else also kind of feel flat and boring. This teacher guy just tags along with her and the two aren't really given enough time to interact with each other or connect. There's also this other magic guy who looks eerily similar to the main character from Tales from Earthsea. I just didn't really feel any of these bonds because of my lack of investment in the film's emotional core, which is kinda confusing. I think it's supposed to be something about grief, which is a great idea given that this world has the ability to bring the dead back to life. Since Asuna lost her father and that teacher guy lost his wife, who he spends the movie trying to bring back, it could have made for a really interesting mirror on how these two handle the loss of the people they loved. Maybe it could have gone with a theme along the lines of something like Big Hero 6. But all this is weirdly kinda ignored, and then the movie starts acting like Asuna's real conflict is that she's really lonely on the surface world.
What could you possibly want?
Oh, just somebody to talk to, I guess.
This was not built up in the first act at all and feels pretty lame. Plus, even her connection to her late father wasn't developed enough, so that side of the story could have used more work as well. Suzume, a later film in Shinkai's filmography, definitely did a theme like this a lot better in a much more interesting way. In fact, a lot of this movie's plot feels like Suzume, but way less good. Normal girl with only one parent figure meets a magical guy with some form of a key, and then she ends up going on a journey to do what that guy wanted to do after he's rendered useless. Also, both have cute little kitty cats. It really does go to show how much Shinkai grew, to the point where it crafted a similar-ish story to this one and executed it much better. Children Who Chase Lost Voices still isn't bad by any means. Animation, music, worlds, all those are really strong, and there's the occasional charming or nice moment, but it's kind of forgettable in the long run, and nothing about it hasn't been done better by Ghibli. While it's a nice attempt, I don't think that style is really for him. But I do like when Asuna says,
Potatoes! Yay! 5 centimeters.
5 centimeters per second is a movie that deserves an award for having the fastest roll credits in film history.
Hey, they say it's 5 centimeters per second.
Roll credits.
I am just now realizing the irony of this placement. After finishing the place promised in our early days and receiving pretty feedback, I think even Shinkai himself realized that he had gotten ahead of himself with how much he tried and failed to accomplish with that movie. I make this assumption because his second movie, that being this one, is way simpler in comparison and strives to do a lot less. Instead of being a sci-fi, alternate reality, historical war drama thing, this is just a quaint slice of life film. As you'll see later, Shinkai eventually managed to find a fitting balance between calmer, character-driven storytelling and more mystical and crazy ideas. But going back to an earlier point in his career, it is admittedly refreshing to see him reel himself back a bit and make what is solely a down-to-earth movie focused on the characters that's much more mundane than anything else on the list. However, you can still tell he's the one in the director's chair, and he didn't have that much experience yet. It's not painfully obvious like that other disaster, but I don't feel like I ever became fully invested in this story or these these characters. A lot of issues that I have with this film tie back to a very fundamental flaw, and that's the way this movie is structured. 5 centimeters per second is aiming to be more of an anthology movie of sorts, separating itself into 3 separate segments. Heck, these segments have their own title cards and credits, so it's clear what they're going for. While I usually appreciate trying to tell smaller stories instead of needlessly stretching something out, this is a weird case because I actually think it would work way better if they only told one continuously flowing narrative. When they broke that narrative up in the way that they did, it just doesn't work as well. Nothing about the movie is bad, and I enjoyed vibing to a lot of it a decent amount, but it doesn't really fit together. Let's go through the segments and discuss them separately first though. The first one is about these 2 best friends, Takaki and Akari, being separated after Akari moves away. So Takaki gets on a train in the middle of a snowstorm to go meet her, and then they do, and they kiss, and there's not a whole lot else to it. I wish we had spent a little more time establishing the friendship and connection between these two so I can care more about the separation they face. And it's not like they had to worry about making the movie too long, since the film as a whole is only 63 minutes. I think more time showcasing the bond that these two have definitely would have helped. Heck, that stuff could have been an entire segment on its own. Since I'm not as invested, the segment we got feels like it has that overly saccharine tone that Early Days had, and it doesn't gel very well. It gets pretty sweet once the two meet up, and the brief moments we do get to see of the two being together are charming, but it's nothing great. Thankfully, I enjoyed the next segment, which is called Cosmonaut, a lot more than the first one. This one's about a high school girl named Kanai trying to confess her love to her crush, while simultaneously trying to figure out what she wants to do with her future. I had a much easier time getting invested in this one, since it focuses on a single character rather than the connection between 2 of them. Kanai's a decent character, and I care about her endeavors well enough, but once again, I wish we had some more time to develop this and have it just be its own separate story completely disconnected from the other ones. Yeah, so remember when I said Kanai was trying to confess her love to her crush? Well, said crush is actually Takaki from the first story, who's now also moved and the two are going to the same high school together. This isn't an outright bad way to tie these 2 stories together, but it just feels kinda awkward. Almost like this story was intended to be its own movie, but then they shoved it in here and changed the love interest to Takaki. He doesn't even do anything related to the other story in here, so his inclusion just feels weird when this whole thing should have just been about Kanai. As a result, these 2 stories just feel clumsily stapled together and don't have themes that really connect, outside of like a character saying that an object moves at 5 blanks per second.
5 kilometers per hour.
Close enough. Roll credits.
And then the third segment barely even feels like a story at all. We go back to focusing on Takaki, now as an adult, trying to come to terms with the fact that he and Akari are separated and going on different life paths. It's nice, I guess, but the segment is only 10 minutes, so there's not enough time for any of it to really emotionally hit or sink in. Once again, the film was definitely in need of a longer runtime. Rather than 3 stories, this felt like it was 2 stories and a short epilogue. Plus, the shift in character focus and the fact that Kanai completely disappears was jarring to say the least. The movie just doesn't flow very well despite its attempts to tie everything together. A much better direction to go would have been to tell a full movie of the Takaki and Akari story, and then maybe save the Kanai stuff for its own spin-off. With the way they actually put these pieces together, it left me wanting a bit more substance than what I actually got. Still, I guess I enjoyed the movie overall. It's got a very chill and nice atmosphere that gives it a pleasant feel, even if it sometimes messes with the mood of the film. The animation is definitely a step up from a place promised in our early days, and there are some really beautiful shots scattered throughout. As I said, I liked the whole Kanai story, and her interactions with Takaki were pretty wholesome, and I also really love the ending montage and song. It's sweet stuff, and it is impactful, just not nearly as much as it clearly wants to be. They could have had a potentially great movie if they just assembled it in a different way, so it's quite a shame to be honest. All in all, the movie is cute, but one that didn't leave too much of an impression on me.
For our opening hymn, The Garden of Eden.
The Garden of Words is the least movie on the list. Only clocking in at a measly 47 minutes, there was a period of time when I even debated whether or not I should rank this among the others. But hey, I guess I can't argue with Wikipedia. This one also seems to get a lot of hate, and I constantly see it being used by people as an example as to why Shinkai is a bad director. And after watching it, I totally get why. However, in spite of that, I surprisingly had a good time with this, and it was better written than I thought it was going to be. But I think it's clear to everyone, the people who worked on this movie included, that the writing isn't the main selling point here. That honor goes to the animation, because this is a gorgeous movie. How much more budget were Shinkai and his crew given to make something that looks this pretty? If Ponyo is how many shades of blue can we fit into one movie, then the Garden of Words is how many shades of green can we fit into one movie. The colors here are just so lush and rich, making for scenery that's immersive and feels relaxing to be in. It's especially well done when it comes to the animation on the rain and the bustling city, and it's just mwah. The film's soundtrack is nearly as beautiful as the visuals and complements each scene and each environment so nicely, especially when the film starts to get a bit more heavy and the music swells up. It's great stuff. The mix of visuals and soundtrack here creates such a nice atmosphere unlike anything else Shinkai has made, and I think that alone makes the movie worth watching, or at least worth putting on as some nice ambiance background noise. If this is the movie's main selling point, then you would probably think I wouldn't like it all that much, and I'm kinda surprised too. Normally I get annoyed by movies that desperately show off pretty visuals in an attempt to cover up the poorly made story, but this one's different for two reasons. First, as I said, it's only 47 minutes long, so it's harder to get worked up over something much more brief that isn't trying to pull off that much story-wise. And second, I think the mood that this movie crafts with its animation and music does blend really well with the vibe of the actual story, as flawed as the story might be. It's a quaint little tale about this high school student cutting classes on rainy days and going to the park, where he meets and becomes friends with this older lady who ditches her job on rainy days. It's really simple, but still quite nice, and definitely gives off the relaxing vibes the filmmakers were going for. The interactions between these two are pretty wholesome, and seeing them bond and move forward in their separate lives and personal goals because of each other is really great to see. Despite the super short runtime, I didn't walk away from this film feeling like it lacked the substance it needed, like I did with 5 centimeters per second. Now, there are still quite a few things that could have used some more development. I wish we had more time to explore Takao's journey to becoming a shoemaker, and especially Yukino's conflict about her quitting her job as a teacher due to bullying and harassment from her students. That could have really strengthened the core of the movie about Takao helping Yukino and make it hit even harder when it's revealed who Yukino actually was. It's quite disappointing, but I'm at least happy that what the movie does focus on is developed and compelling enough. We get just enough time to see these two bond in order for the story to carry out in a natural way and actually hit on some form of an emotional level. But of course, I must address the thing that everyone talks about with this movie, that being the extremely sussy age gap between the two main characters. From my perspective, yeah, it's undeniably very sussy, but it didn't bother me too much because it didn't feel like the film was forcing these two into a romantic relationship. There's even a point where Yukino insinuates that it's wrong for a student to be in love with a teacher, so yeah, based points for her. I'm at least glad this movie sorta knows how weird this relationship would be and doesn't act like they're bound to be in love. The film even ends with them separated, showing that they went on to live separate lives, which was definitely the best direction to go. At least until the post-credit scene. Damn it. There are still plenty of very uncomfortable moments that don't work at all, like the infamous foot scene. And also this almost laughable speech that Takao gives towards the end where he yells about how much he hates Yukino. It's trying so hard to be emotional and it goes on for so long that it's honestly a little bit funny.
So tell me, goddammit! Tell me that little kids should run along to school!
But at least the score here is great and it ends really nicely. Once again, great ending montage and song. In spite of its, frankly, very big faults, Garden of Words is still a pretty nice movie. It's not the deepest or most compelling thing out there, but the beautiful atmosphere is able to elevate the story just enough for me to call this worthwhile. I'd even go as far as to say that this is easily the best film that Shinkai did before Your Name. Not exactly an amazing lineup, but hey, Shinkai is starting to show noticeable improvement in his work, and things only got better from here. Alright, we've officially made it to the top 3, and coincidentally, these ones happen to be the 3 most popular films in the Shinkai library. Be honest with yourself for a sec, you clicked on the video for my thoughts on one or more of these 3, and you don't really care about the 4 movies I just talked about. I mean, not that I blame you. And listen up, what I'm about to tell you is really going to make a lot of you hate me, but out of Shinkai's 3 most acclaimed and beloved movies, Your Name is the weakest one. Okay, now for those of you who are still here, the answer to your question is no, I do not hate Your Name. I didn't really like it all that much when I first saw it way back when, and it's been the butt of some jokes in my videos, but rewatching it when going through this entire filmography, I have grown more of an appreciation for it. Enough of an appreciation to the point where I can say that I actually like it. I certainly enjoy it and respect it a lot, it's just that for a movie that is praised by everyone to the moon and back, a movie that is essentially the new Spirited Away, I still don't really latch on to the immense amount of love for this movie that I merely find to be just good. It's not an After Sun or a Dune, I still got somewhat attached to the story and characters, and I love the direction it wants to go in, but unfortunately, that kinda gets buried underneath a lot of the problems similar to the ones that all the previous Shinkai films had. Positive stuff first though. The animation, yup, you all saw that one coming. This is one of the most stunning anime films of all time. Heck, one of the most stunning animated films of all time. It does so much more with this amazing visual quality than Garden of Words. Adding emotion, liveliness, or anything really to a scene, this animation just does that perfectly. Every landscape or shot of the sky belongs in an art museum. You've all heard about how good this movie looks, but it really is that astonishing. I also love the concept, and this movie plays with it in a super cool way. On the surface, it seems like a classic body swap story, which has been done by dozens of cartoons and even other films. This trope sorta gets a bad rap since it's been done so many times, but Your Name does it in a way that feels entirely fresh and offers a whole new spin on the story that I can't say I've seen anywhere else. You see, with most body swap stories, the two characters who swap already have some sort of relation to one another, and the conflict lies in them trying to understand each other better now that they're in the other person's body. Your Name, on the other hand, focuses on two complete strangers with different ways of life, living in different places with different aspirations and such, switching at random times. Honestly, I find that so much more interesting because the way both of them react to their environment and the people around them is also messed up once they swap. A Japanese country girl and a Tokyo city boy are pretty much polar opposites, so seeing them switch places and try to adjust to each other's lives and even try to improve their relationships with other people is quite powerful, to be honest. The movie knows how to use the body swap idea to its advantage, and it makes for a lot of really funny and really heartwarming moments. I really love both Taki and Mitsuha's characters, especially Mitsuha. I cared for her desire to get more than her provincial life, and it's neat seeing her get what she wants in the form of the body swap. The interactions the two share during this portion, even though they technically haven't even met yet, are really enjoyable and fun. Plus, I enjoy the way the minor and side characters react to all this stuff as well. It's charming, it's relaxing, and I really got immersed in both the setting of Tokyo and the quiet town of Itamori. Making you feel a wide array of emotions and putting you into the setting and story is a sign of some really great direction. Oh, how he's come so far. So basically, I was really into this movie's concept and story and dug pretty much everything about it for the first 45 minutes. Then slowly but surely, the movie starts juggling a few too many themes and ideas and really starts to lose me. Now, once Taki and Mitsuha stopped switching bodies out of the blue, I was still interested in the direction they would take this. Since the two still haven't met and we don't know their connection, there's still a great sense of intrigue for the movie to take advantage of. And it does go to some interesting places with this idea, but the execution of it all is pretty muffled. Taki goes and learns that Mitsuha is a person from the past and her town got hit by a comet and everyone died.
The end.
I mean, that makes the whole body swap thing a bit more convoluted, but sure, I can buy into it. Then Taki goes to this cave and drinks Mitsuha, and he's able to go back to the past and swap with Mitsuha again. Okay. I feel like this movie starts to get so focused on tying up the story that it completely abandons any of the rules that came with this body swap thing and just does whatever it wants to do. It's not like Howl's Moving Castle where you can just vibe to the characters and the chaos of the world. Your Name absolutely needs the body swapping for the story to function, but it starts using it in a way that's just confusing. It's mainly a struggle of them trying to connect body swapping to time traveling and attempting to change history and the fate of the past. It just doesn't mesh well and really took me out of the film, which stinks given how invested I was in it at first. Taki and Mitsuha actually meet each other during this part, and like how? What? Call me a nitpicker all you want, but I really think all this stuff sorta causes the movie to fall on its face and lose a lot of the charm it had. Any emotional impact that this would have had just feels gone. It doesn't help either that the story also becomes a lot weaker in the final act. Mitsuha and her friends evacuating the town to avoid the comet that they know is going to hit could have made for a really thrilling climax, but the stakes and tensions feel oddly low for some reason. I understand why nobody else in the town would want to believe Mitsuha about the comet, but they really could have done more to make this situation feel more tense and enhance the ticking time bomb element of everyone needing to get to the school. There also needed to be more development for the relationship between Mitsuha and her dad. If there was, I can see this climax hitting a lot harder, but it really doesn't. I like the epilogue of everyone getting saved and Mitsuha and Taki eventually meeting in the future, but as a whole, I think the second half of the film is really what sours it for me and makes it more of a tedious and confusing experience. Nothing here is awful, the movie is still enjoyable most of the way through. I just feel like it loses that sense of magic and deep connection I had with the story during the first half. It's a shame that it crumbled down in the way that it did. Again, I still think Your Name is a good movie, and I like it quite a bit. The good elements of this movie are more than enough to outweigh the stuff that doesn't work. But said stuff does taint the movie, unfortunately, and I just can't call it the masterpiece that everyone else does. It's a good movie, I have immense respect for it. I'm overjoyed it was such a big success and made Shinkai a household name, but it's not one of my personal favorites. Phew, that segment took a lot out of me. And for the people who haven't clicked off the video yet, I think it's about time we move on to the movies that are some of my personal favorites.
Sun, all the time sun. How about some rain around here? Is that too much to ask?
Weathering with You is my jam. I had always enjoyed this movie since I first watched it, but revisiting it for this video, I really fell in love with this movie's pleasant vibe, its amazing characters, its banger soundtrack, and it really hit me how well put together and even powerful this entire film is. A lot of people really don't seem to like this one and point to it as the quintessential example of why Shinkai is just making the same movie over and over again. I get where these people are coming from, but for me personally, I think Weathering with You takes a direction that honestly works way better for Shinkai's style than Your Name did. It's clear that I tend to gravitate towards stories that try to be more simple and charming, more than ones that try to pull off a lot of things at once, even if they do still do that well. Up to this point, Shinkai has had a very interesting track record when it comes to finding the sweet spot between these sides of storytelling. Movies like 5 centimeters per second I would call a little too simplistic and bare bones for their own good. And on the other hand, utter disasters like The Place Promised in our early days try to juggle so much that they end up becoming borderline unwatchable. That was sort of the problem I had with Your Name, and what held it back from really hitting me. But Weathering with You is just the absolute perfect blend of a more straightforward story and the director's signature weird and mystical elements, one of which being McDonald's. The film manages to incorporate the magic and spiritual elements in a way that works, yet this still manages to maintain the vibe of a charming, laid-back slice-of-life film. And I think that's due to just how easily likable the characters in this film are. Hodaka is such a great protagonist who fits this story perfectly. Not only is he really pleasant and good-natured, but I found his conflict pretty interesting. And it's able to stay that way throughout the entire movie as more and more obstacles pop up. A lonely kid going into the big city for the first time, trying to get away from his old life and make a new one in Tokyo.
That's in Japan!
I was going to nitpick that I wish we could have seen what Hodaka's life back on his home island was like and why exactly he wanted to leave. But honestly, I think starting the movie with him having already left kinda makes it work better. It's immediately clear how much he wants to start over and go on a completely new path, and his struggle to do so in the big city is one that I really care for. I was invested in every step he took, and whenever something went his way and he was able to find people to help him out, I genuinely felt happy for him. The film gets even better when he meets Hina, whom he has some great chemistry with, and I love seeing the two of them interact. In fact, I love pretty much all the other characters in this movie, and the way they work off of Hodaka. Hina is really endearing, but I still love her motivation to make a living for her and her brother, which perfectly mirrors Hodaka's own struggle. Kazuke and Natsumi are really funny and make for good support companions for Hodaka in the first act. Natsumi is especially really fun, and the motorbike chase would probably make Tom Cruise crap his pants. Nagi is also pretty fun, and perfectly completes their little trio. The villain guy is not great, but he has a funny looking pompadour and funny looking running cycle, so I'm cool with it.
Would you look at the size of that monster?
But yeah, it's really the characters in this movie that bring everything together so nicely and make it an absolute delight. Plot-wise, the movie kind of slows down once the Sunshine Girl business is started, but I don't care in the slightest. These three kids forming their own business, making other people happy, and living life together as they grow closer is more than enough to keep the movie afloat. But even if you're not too into these calm, character-driven moments, I think you'll still be invested in the movie as a whole. It still knows how to have natural stakes and have some sort of threat looming over the main characters. Little does Hodoka know for the first half of the movie that he's being hunted down by the Japanese government, and so are Hina and Nagi, coincidentally enough. So the three run off together and try to find a place to stay, and during this segment, you're just praying they'll all be able to make it through in the end and find a place where they can be safe together. Not just for the single night, but for long enough to start their life together. The familial vibe here is just so strong and endearing that it honestly almost made me shed a tear merely seeing their happiness. It's right here that Hodoka found his new life. At this point in the film, he has practically nowhere to go and no job left, but he's found loving and caring people that he's connected with. Then when Hina evaporates, you can just see how much it crushes Hodoka and how motivated he is to go find her as he breaks free from the police. In that scene on the train tracks where he just keeps running and running and running against everything that's holding him back inside, reminiscing about the times he's spent with Hina and the new life he's found, which moves him to keep on running. God, this movie's so good! And have I mentioned that the music is incredible? Have I mentioned that the animation is incredible? Gonna be real, the best looking Shinkai film. Yeah, I know what I said about Your Name, but this movie finds a way to pack so much magic and whimsy into each frame, even the ones that are supposed to look dull and gloomy. And when it's not dull and gloomy, it's absolutely astounding. Not to mention how seamlessly it combines with the score to create something that's just breathtaking. Mainly in the aforementioned running scene and the scene where Hina and Hodoka are falling together in the sky. All this makes for a film that not only looks great, but feels great to watch and get invested in its world and characters. The only real issue I have with it is the same one that everyone else does, the ending. I get that they wanted to have Hina and Hodoka end up together and all that, but did they really have to have it at the cost of Tokyo becoming completely flooded? I even would have taken a Deus Ex Machina where Hina becomes fully human and is allowed to stay on Earth or something instead of this. It's just a really sloppy way of wrapping everything up, especially since everyone is somehow cool with the city being underwater, and it feels like the happy ending the movie has been building up to just kinda got undone. Instead, we get, oh yeah, sure, I drowned an entire city populated by millions upon millions of people, but hey, at least I get a GF, which is, very stupid. It frustrates me to no end, and I would do anything to change it if I could. Also, epic cameos! Oh, wow. Gee, it's me too. Outside of those gripes though, Weathering with You is just fantastic. This is the point where it feels like Shinkai finally found his groove and channeled all the best elements of his filmmaking into one magnificent movie. It's funny, it's beautiful, it's charming, it's magical. Talking about this film has only made me love it even more. I hope that it continues to grow in popularity and it gets more and more fans who adore it in the way that I do. I wholeheartedly and unapologetically love Weathering with You. And, you know, I wanted to say it'd be nearly impossible for Shinkai to top himself after this, but he did it. And he did it with a chair.
It's a chair.
For as universally praised as Your Name is, and for as much as I've gushed about Weathering with You, I don't think either of those movies are able to match the marvel that is Suzume. What an absolutely masterful work of art this movie is, which seems pretty insane to say out loud. This is that anime movie. The one you've seen a bunch of memes of for being about a guy who turns into a chair and then runs around with this girl and goes to McDonald's while in pursuit of a magical cat. This sounds completely and utterly stupid on paper, and there's no way it could make for a genuinely amazing story. But, as some of the greatest films and directors of all time have shown us, it's never about the ideas that you have, it's about how you handle them and craft them to create an experience like none other. And Suzume is exactly that. Walking out of the theater after seeing this movie for the first time, I knew I had loved what I had just seen, but I was still struggling to process it and put all the pieces together. And on my rewatches, everything was perfectly put into place, and I saw just what this movie truly stood for. As I said, this film is full of weird ideas and concepts flying in one after the other, but it all feels like it's working in the film's favor. The titular character in this movie is essentially just an average girl, so once the weirdness of the movie starts to unfold, it's like we're viewing it from her eyes, which makes it feel not so weird or far out, and more like we're on this journey together with her. Because we're viewing this story from Suzume's perspective, we're seeing all these mystical shenanigans in the way she would. We're feeling a gigantic range of emotions through the ups and downs of this trip. We're meeting and connecting with this large cast of incredible characters and discovering a little something about our own world and the people in our lives. On top of that, she's just a really fun, likable, poppy character who's just nice to follow along. Her dynamic with Sota is absolutely golden. The two bounce off each other in the perfect way, making them both endearing protagonists that you want to see succeed. Not only are they both really enjoyable and funny, but they tap into each other and their internal struggles in a way that feels natural, adding extra layers to both, especially with Suzume. At the start of the film, I wasn't quite sure what her situation was and what kind of theme they were trying to set up, but I think that was the film's intention because it gradually hits you harder and harder in what the film is trying to do once you begin piecing the parts of the story together. Who is this lady who's looking after Suzume? What is her relation to her? Why does she have this random chair lying around? As the film progresses and it's revealed what the answers to those questions are, it becomes clearer and clearer that this is a film about grief and learning to let go. But it handles this theme in a way that's both far more interesting and far more effective than any film I think I've ever seen. You see, Suzume has a mother who died when she was little, so her aunt took her in and raised her. The two seem to be living a happy life together, but the hole left by her mother's death is still there. It's not easy to sense, the movie doesn't have a depressing tone or anything like that, but you definitely feel like Suzume is missing a piece of herself. Then she meets Sota, he turns into a chair, and the two set out on an adventure to find this little kitty. Seems pretty straightforward, but it's made obvious that this film is less about where these characters go and more about who they come across. As the journey continues, Suzume meets several characters who help and support her and provide her with special memories. Not only is this stuff really wholesome and I enjoy the way she works off of pretty much everyone, but it all ties back to the core of the film. One that is all about the connections we make with the people around us. Suzume lost her mother, the person she had the most valuable connection with, but in spite of the love that the two provided for each other, that doesn't mean that there isn't love still left to give after she's gone. By going all across Japan, meeting and interacting with all sorts of people, from girls her age to kids to adults to elderly, by helping those people or having them help her, Suzume formed more valuable bonds. Bonds that she wouldn't have formed if she hadn't set off with Sota to help. Bonds that mean something to her, but don't define her own happiness. At the beginning of the film, we see a younger version of Suzume wandering in a magical field after losing her mother. And then at the ending, after seeing Suzume meet all these people and go through all these experiences, we swing back around to that opening scene with a new perception on what life is truly worth. Older Suzume then explains that to her past self by essentially saying, "It's gonna be okay. There are bound to be moments in life that make us sad, make us feel lonely or empty inside. But even during dark times, there's always a tomorrow. A tomorrow that supplies new opportunities, new people, new friendships, new experiences, new lifelong memories." That's an absolutely beautiful theme that's conveyed through this entire film in a way that feels like an expertly crafted metaphor. A metaphor that, on top of being really thought-provoking, also simply makes for a delightful and enjoyable watch. Suzume and Sota are amazing protagonists, like I said, and all the colorful characters they come across are beaming with life. The plot structure is technically repetitive, but it never feels that way because I was always anticipating what these two would get into next or who they would meet. Many feel like it sort of falls off in the second half, but I found myself just as engaged since there are still compelling relationships and drama that the movie needs to focus on, which it does very well. Not once was I bored or disinterested during this movie. There's always something for the audience to latch onto. I feel as if this is a film that really anybody can enjoy. They don't even need to think about it on a super deep level or connect with it personally. They can just sit back and view the amazing presentation of a theme that already stands well on its own. The music and animation are, once again, absolutely gorgeous. The film is filled to the brim with comical scenarios and charming moments that make it a nice ride to be on. The voice actors provide so much life to their characters in both languages. Surazawa and his singing especially, that guy was amazing. The film even feels like a passionate homage of sorts to the country it's set in, given how many locations the characters go to. All of this stuff miraculously comes together into a well-made, well-written, well-animated package that blows me away with its sheer beauty. Looking back, I'm honestly kinda amazed that Shinkai made it this far. Going from much duller films that didn't know what they wanted to do or how to structure themselves to this absolutely brilliant movie that ties everything together neatly and and gorgeously. Suzume is without a doubt my favorite film Shinkai has ever made. From its smart storytelling to its lovely characters to its enchanting atmosphere, this film is just incredible. A triumph that in my mind goes down as an instant anime classic. Well, with all that said and done, I guess there's only one question left to answer. Is Suzume the best animated film of the year? No.